So vegetable oils, oils of any kind, were really not used for human consumption. They were used for industrial machinery as lubricants. In the Industrial Revolution, I mean, first it was really whale oil from the 1820s to the 1860s, and they were used for machinery. And then when we killed all the whales, we moved over to cottonseed oil, which was a byproduct of, the cotton was a huge crop in the southern United States, and they didn't know what to do with the leftover oil, so they started using that to replace whale oil. And it was not a food. This oil was used a little bit in the late 1800s to adulterate butter, to kind of sneak it in, but here's the problem with oils and human consumption. They are not stable. They're greasy and oily. So this is just to show you the chemistry. A saturated fatty acid has no double bonds in there between the carbon molecules, and so it's straight. A double bond makes a chink in the chain, but if it's saturated, meaning it's saturated with hydrogens, there are no double bonds. So that's straight and flat, and those molecules can sit on top of each other all together, and there's no space between them, and so they make solids. Saturated fats are solid. Whereas unsaturated fatty acids, this is a polyunsaturated fatty acid. Poly means multiple double bonds between the carbons, and they're unsaturated because if you broke this bond and you could add hydrogens here. So it's not saturated with hydrogens. So, and those molecules don't lie flat together. They're all squiggly and wiggly, and so there's space between them, and therefore they're oils. That's the basic chemistry. So in order to use oils as foodstuff, they had to make them straight. And they did this through a process called hydrogenation. So they took oleic acid. This is the one of the polyunsaturated fats. Actually, that's not polyunsaturated fat. That's a monounsaturated fat. But anyway, the idea is they straighten it out through a process called hydrogenation. And hydrogenation is a very complex process that involves all kinds, huge factors. I actually have been in a hydrogenation factory, and there's just floors and floors of machinery, and they use metal catalyst and the hexane solvent, and then they go through this incredibly long process, because really when you take seeds or beans and you press them, what comes out is this rancid gray liquid, and then you have to make that palatable. So you have to deodorize it and winterize it so it's stable, and you have to go through all these steps. You don't churn it, and you don't milk it from a cow and churn it. So it's a lot more complicated. But that process is what allowed vegetable oils to come into the food supply. And that happened because once it could be stabilized, actually, when they first stabilized, this is Procter & Gamble, who were originally soap makers and tallow makers, and when they first stabilized cottonseed oil in the early 1900s, about 1910 or so, when this process was discovered, they looked at that and they said, oh, we'll sell it as soap. And actually, a lot of your soaps are made from oils. That's what's, a lot of soaps are. And then they looked at it and they said, well, that actually looks a lot like lard. Why don't we try to sell it as lard? So, and this is in 1911. So they figured that out, and they had a number of names they eventually landed on this idea of Crisco. And that was the introduction of vegetable oils as a commercial product into the human food supply, really. That was really the beginning of it as a commercial product. And they were brilliant about how they went about marketing this product. And they did it, you have to understand, in America in the early 1900s, particularly in America, everybody wanted the new, well, almost every society, everybody wants the new and the modern, and so this was, they would market Crisco as something, I'm going to quote now, that comes from the book of Crisco, that while Crisco may be a shock to the older generation born in an age less progressive than our own, it is, a modern woman is glad to give up butter and lard, just as her grandmother, quote, her grandmother was happy to forego the fatiguing spinning wheel. So it was supposed to be a liberation. It was also marketed in contrast to the always sort of sordid conditions of animal slaughter and extraction of animal fats. But Crisco was made in sparkling bright rooms and clean countertops and chemistry labs, and they white enamel covers metal surfaces to contrast it to the conditions of making animal fats. So, and it was incredibly successful.